love to hear about turf on Valentine's Day, but you know what? I like to talk about it, so we're going to get into it today. And this is a talk that I give about kind of keys to sustainable turf grass management in Nebraska. And so we'll cover a lot of the big general topics today, and this is more than just a general overview. It's not going to be, well, this is, you fertilize these times a year and you spray on this. Because honestly, I absolutely hate calendars. I think spraying and putting on products and fertilizers based on calendar is really lazy. And we're all master gardeners here. Well, at least you guys are. I'm not, so you're better than me. And I think it's kind of using our eyes, looking at the environment and making decisions on how we should be managing our turf so that we're doing it in as much of a sustainable way as possible. Because the question really is, what is sustainable? Can turf be sustainable? I think a lot of people will say, no, it can't. Turf's not sustainable. And so let's try to talk about what that means and is it even possible. So what is sustainable lawn care? Well, there's different definitions, and there's not really clear rules. Same thing for organic lawn care. I mean, you can have a lawn care company that says they're using organic products, but there's no set rules for lawn care like there would be for traditional food production. The USDA can have some oversight in. So without having clear rules and clear definitions of sustainability, we kind of run through what people think sustainable lawn care means. One would be sustainable lawn care is lawn care with no inputs. Well, that's impossible. You can't have a lawn without inputs. If you don't mow your lawn, it's not a lawn anymore. It's grass. It's a field. It's a prairie. It will change quickly from grasses to weeds to trees over time because grass is an early succession plant. So it can't be no inputs. There has to be some input because we're maintaining our grasses in a pretty much constant juvenile vegetative state where they're not, going to sexual reproduction, making seed, keeping them dense and uniform. And so no input lawn care really isn't lawn care. It's not a lawn. You could do organic products and say, it's organic, but again, there's no magic definition for what organic is in the industry. I mean, there was a story of a lawn care operator in Madison contacted a professor that I had and said, when do I go spray my 2,4-D? And he was advertising as organic, and there's not much that he was able to say to justify why he's asking for 2,4-D, except for he didn't realize that wasn't organic, which is a little crazy, even 10 years ago, but that's what he really said. The other side of organic too is people trying to use products that aren't labeled, thinking that, trying to kill a weed with high concentrations of acetic acid or, strong vinegar is safer than trying to do it with other products, or looking at maybe using a manure-based fertilizer versus a synthetic fertilizer. I mean, if you get a manure-based fertilizer on concrete and that fertilizer goes into the water stream, it is just as potent to the environment as a synthetic would be. And so it's not always safer, it's not always better, it's not always legal to try these kind of home remedy organic practices. I'm not advocating against organic, I'm just saying that there's still a lot of kind of confusion as to what it really means. And so I think the turf industry in general has really said, if we're trying to become sustainable, let's really be trying to minimize inputs and really just be smart with what we're putting down under our turf. That means less fertilizer, or maybe not even less fertilizer, just putting down fertilizer when it needs to be applied at the amount that needs to be applied. Same thing with water, same thing with pesticides. Another big part of minimizing inputs is changing expectations. It's easier said than done. I know the USGA, if anyone follows golf, has tried to bring their tournaments to golf courses that looked a little bit more brown, a little bit more dried out. And, honestly, public pushback has been really against that. They don't want that. They want to see the green, beautiful grass on TV. They don't want to see the drier, leaner turf that, they're trying to promote. So this is an example of expectation. This is what makes turf management so difficult because there's, a million different ways to skin a cat here. The image on the right, this might be perfectly acceptable for one homeowner. Whoops. But then over here, this is what they deem to be acceptable. And so that's what makes it a really challenge. I mean, how do you determine how much fertilizer has to go down, how much water has to go down, when some people have very different levels of expectation? I'm sure this person on the left just absolutely hates this person because they're thinking that, they're getting all these dandelions over here, and so they have to spray. They'll see the little yard sign that they sprayed for dandelions, and so it can lead to some fights between neighbors for sure. Ultimately, though, we're talking about organic or low input or even conventional lawn care. Lawns require a lot of energy. Sometimes people try to figure out, is a lawn carbon neutral? And some of the justification for that is, lawns make thatch. Thatch is stored carbon. It goes into the soil. It's very slow to break down. If you really figure out all the energy that's required, be it physical energy, like, pushing this mower through the grass, or more traditionally using a traditional lawnmower, it's taking a lot of energy. So we have gasoline, production of gasoline, the burning of gasoline, the shipping of gasoline, that's all energy intensive. Manufacture of pesticides and fertilizers take a lot of energy. And then even water. A lot of times we're on municipal water, and so you need energy to pump the water around. A lot of that water, since it's municipal, is treated. That takes more energy. So if you kind of add everything up, it's really impossible to say a lawn is carbon neutral. It's not to say it doesn't have environmental benefits. There are definitely things like holding the soil together, reducing runoff. But, I'm not going to be here and advocate for a lawn. I'm a turfgrass professor. I'm not a turfgrass advocate. I'm not going to say it is the most ideal, perfect thing for every situation. But how we manage it can definitely impact how much energy we need to put into our lawn. How often are we mowing? How much water is going down? How much fertilizer and pesticide? If we reduce those, then we can start to get at least closer to a more carbon neutral budget, instead of a very carbon intensive, high energy type of management regime. This is some of the interesting thing about a lawn, though, is, you can think about it in the real negative, where it's hard to be carbon neutral, but it is also pretty well known that grassland systems, from a lawn to the tall grass prairies that cover a lot of Nebraska, they are very good banks of carbon. And so if we can try to leverage how much carbon we're burning to maintain that grass and still get a lot of the benefits from that lawn pumping carbon into the soil, is going to be really, really helpful to improving the health of the soil, microbial diversity of the soil, holding the soil together so we have less chance of leaching and runoff of nutrients. And so having carbon in the soil is definitely a great thing to do. A lot of times, if we have poor soils, we recommend using compost as a way to try to even force and add more carbon to that soil. So this is a computer model from a soil in eastern Colorado, in which they had different levels of fertility and clippings being returned or being removed. So this initial line down here was putting down about 1.5 applications of fertilizer a year, with clippings being removed. And then this axis here shows how much carbon is in the soil. And this is megatons per hectare. That's a lot. That's, weight. It's a lot of weight that is being sequestered into that soil. So at time zero, we see that there's not very much, there's about 3.5, almost 4% carbon in the soil. And then if we're on 1.5 applications of fertilizer a year, but we're removing clippings, we don't really see an increase in carbon. One of the reasons we don't see an increase in carbon is because we're taking clippings away. So we're removing fertilizer that could be recycled in that system. If we add the clippings back in, though, in the black solid line here, we see a nice increase in the amount of carbon that's in that soil, going from 3.5 to about 6.5 or 7%. That's a lot of carbon. That's a lot of benefits to the health of our soil. So that's really good. If we add higher fertilizer, we see that it goes even higher, especially with clippings being returned. And then it starts to plateau, though. So at about 50 years, when you're fertilizing 3 times a year and returning clippings, we don't really see that much more carbon going in. So that's one of the reasons we don't see a big benefit in terms of carbon sequestration in the long term. Early, if you have a young lawn that's sequestering carbon very quickly, you can say that that turf is a carbon bank more than it's a carbon source. But when it's 50 years, you still have to mow, you still have to water, you still get some fertilizer, although not as much as it would when it's in a young lawn. And we're not seeing that carbon storage anymore. And so this is where we're losing that ability for the lawn to be, closer to carbon neutral. And that's where, if we can have a more established lawn, if we can reduce inputs, then we can, start to handle that in a way that we can have it become more carbon neutral, and good for our soil environment. This is what it looks like. The thatch that we talk about, that you hear about on Backyard Farmer, where we're talking about how much thatch you have. I mean, you can think about that as a bad thing, and generally, 90% of turf problems generally are related to thatch, either in a home lawn or up to a golf course or athletic field. But this is stored carbon that is, good for the health of that soil. And so the question is, how can we manage this thatch, but still pump carbon into the soil to improve the health of that soil? So this is the thatch layer here on top. Thatch is really any dead tissue that is on top of the soil tissue below. This is not caused from clippings. If you look at it, you can see all the stems and roots and crowns. It's all this stuff in here, lower in the canopy. That green tissue up here that we're going to cut with our mower, it decays in a day or so. It's mainly water. It's about 85 to 90% water. And it's highly rich in carbon, so microbes love to eat it up right away. So mulch mowing doesn't contribute to this. This is too much water and too much fertilizer that's causing this. And so again, that's trying to find that right balance between, not putting in too much inputs and causing more and more problems. A larger company might go around and sell applications of fertilizer, and they might sell 5 applications of fertilizer. If your lawn is 50 years old, it probably needs about 1 or 2 applications a year. But they're going to sell you on 5 because it means more money in their pocket. What else does it do? Well, it increases the amount of thatch. So now they're going to have to pay. They're going to charge you to do dethatching and aeration. And so that's why if you're managing your own lawn, then you can use your awareness to make sure that you're not putting too much on and creating more problems by putting down too much water, too much fertilizer, and being on some calendar which is too arbitrary to be really highly effective and precise. So really thatch, this is an important point again, thatch is really just any slowly decaying plant tissues above the soil. It's those dead crowns, it's the stems, highly lignified tissue relative to the other tissue in the plant. It's the leaf sheaths, which are kind of coating the bottoms of the leaves. And they're just very hard for microbes to break down. It's not roots, it's not clippings, which is thatch. And so it's important to differentiate, what is causing this and understanding why it's occurring. Just another picture of that. Again, this is a severe environment. And again, this would be something that's bad. I talked before about Zach Riker and I, when Zach was here, talk about if you had a lot of thatch, it probably, he thought that about 90% of all the problems he saw in a turf were related back to too much thatch. And you can look at this. Just imagine this is a great place for insects to hang out and feed. It's nice and moist. You have a lot of moisture sitting right above the soil. If you add water, water has to move through this thatch, which is very waxy. Doesn't want to even get into the soil. And so it's generally, problematic, and for a lot of different reasons. And so, while we want to try to get organic matter into the soil, we don't want to get a lot of thatch. And so that's what we're really trying to accomplish when we're managing our turf grasses. Hello. All right. So why is thatch a problem? Why are we spending so much time on thatch? So carbon is good in the soil. Thatch on top of the soil is bad. Well, one of the main reasons is the crowns, the growing point of that turf, where the roots come up and the shoots come up. If that growing point is live, which is a compressed meristem, if it's alive, that plant can recover as long as there's enough little sugar in that crown to help to promote recovery. And so what we find a lot of times is you'll see winter desiccation injury in this part of the country. When the winters we don't get a lot of snow or rain, it's because those crowns are elevated. Or in the summertime when it's really dry, those crowns are elevated. They're exposed to the environment. They can dry out faster. And so we want to get those crowns buried, and they get hung up in that thatch if we have a thatch issue. Again, they harbor pests. They reduce water infiltration. If we're mowing, it's really puffy. Your mower kind of sinks into that stuff, and so it scalps and looks pretty bad. And when you have scalping, now you have holes in your lawn for weeds and diseases and insects to take hold. So there's nothing really good about having too much thatch. Having a little bit of thatch, though, isn't terrible, but too much thatch leads to situations like this. This is a golf course in central part of the state, and they didn't have enough of a budget to really control the thatch. Desiccation came through. Those exposed crowns were elevated. The dry winds of Nebraska winter in 2014 just dried those crowns out and ended up killing all the high and exposed parts because those crowns were not buried in the soil. They were elevated and stuck in that thatch.